was your initial reaction to the news that we got this morning?
Well, I was not surprised that President Trump took the action he did. We knew for a while that he'd been building up military forces in the region. Of course, we saw what was going on with the narco-trafficking boats in the seas. He had given Maduro a chance to walk away from power. You know, Maduro is not a duly elected president. He lost the election in 2024. He refused to walk away. Instead, he used force to stay in power. He's been engaged in narco-trafficking for some time. He was indicted first in 2020 in the United States. You go back to 2015, President Obama said that the Venezuelan situation presented a national security threat to the United States. Biden refused to acknowledge the presidency of Maduro. So this is a bipartisan issue, and it's a national security issue for the United States. So I was proud that President Trump took the strong step to remove him, just like President Bush did in 1989 with Noriega in Panama, to take him out of his country, to bring him here to face justice for the narco-trafficking and the murderous activity that he's been involved with.
And when did you first hear about what had happened?
Well, the first time I heard about it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up to some text messages from folks around East Texas that were texting me in the middle of the night. And so I immediately began to engage with the news sources and find out what I could. And so we've been tracking ever since. I expect that we're going to get a good debrief when we return to Washington, D.C. on Monday or Tuesday and understand what the president wants to do moving forward. And I think Congress has a significant role to play constitutionally. Article 1 provides that Congress needs to be involved in these decisions if the use of military force is going to persist and continue in the country.
And of course, you talked about the previous history with the situation going on in Venezuela. Do you feel like that this was only a matter of time before something like this happened?
Yeah, it was just a matter of time. And I think leaders around the world are beginning to understand that they can trust the words of President Trump. He's not joking around when he says, I need you to do something that is in the national security interests of the American people. And if you don't do it, like Iran didn't do it, and now Maduro didn't do it, you're going to face severe consequences by the United States military. And I have no problem with that. That reasserts the strength of the United States on the world stage. And frankly, it is a great model for what President Trump's been talking about the restoration of the Monroe Doctrine. Here in the Western Hemisphere, China and Russia have been growing in influence by building partners. We need to make sure that stops and stops immediately. It is not in the national security interests of the United States and its citizens to see that happen.
And one of the statements that was, of course, mentioned earlier this morning was about running the country in the meantime until they can have a safe transition of power. Talk about your stance on that and what you think about that.
Yeah, I have lots of questions about what President Trump meant about us running Venezuela. Certainly, I think Congress needs to get more information about that information. We need to be involved in that process and that discussion. What I think needs to happen as quickly as possible is a restoration of the democratically elected leader from 2024 to make sure that he is able to come to power, and that the political influence of Ms. Machado, who really was the political force behind the 2024 election, can also exist as it should in a free society, as it would have had it not been for Maduro's intervention.
And one of the things that has been talked about, and one of the things that's been, even before this discussed, was, of course, the resources that were at play with something like this. Talk about the use of resources and the tapping into the resources that was discussed by President Trump.
Yeah, well, the United States Constitution under Article 2 gives the president inherent power as the commander-in-chief to exercise certain authority over the military forces for a specific period of time. The War Powers Resolution Act of 1973, though, sets specific time frames. We have to be notified within 48 hours of any troop movements of this magnitude, and we were. Any activity that occurs, and we were. Now there comes another step that if they're going to be engaged in further operations there in Venezuela for a period of 60 days or more, well, then we need to authorize that. If the Congress does not authorize that, then there needs to be a termination of the use of those forces for that amount of time. So I anticipate we're going to work together with the President and the administration to ensure that the 1973 Act is followed, the Constitution is followed, the separation of powers is adhered to, so that the Article 1 branch of government actually does exercise its authority under the Constitution in conjunction with and in cooperation with the Article 2 powers that are inherently given to the President as the Commander-in-Chief.
And talk about the act of the tapping into the oil, of course, that has been talked about as well.
There's certainly been a problem with the oil development in Venezuela for the past almost 2 decades now because of the socialist regime. They've been suppressing what was really a great economy and a great country there, suppressing it to the detriment of their own people, but also to the positive of our enemies across the world, our adversaries, Russia and China in particular. And so I think that this is a great opportunity for the energy sector in Venezuela to again begin to push forward and to economically thrive for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. And again, freedom is what we want for those people. We want them to choose their own future. We want them to be able to elect their own leaders and to self-govern. We want them to determine their own future. That's what we want for the people of Venezuela. In the same realm, we want national security for the United States and its citizens. Maduro was actually opposed to both ends and both goals, and so that's why he is now facing justice in American courts.
And of course, in one of the previous questions you talked about all of the powers that be, making sure that those are properly done. Some, of course, have questioned the legality of such a move this morning. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think certainly this move last night was legal under the Constitution. I cited the inherent authority of the president as commander-in-chief to use forces for national security interests, not to engage in war. We're not at war with Venezuela, and certainly not to have extended use of troops without the authorization of Congress. And that should come, and I hope that will come if those forces remain in place. But you can't expect the president to come to Congress and to give us a heads up on an event like this, because it wouldn't remain secret. It would put our men and women in uniform and in risk, at danger, when they actually undertake an operation like this. So I appreciate the fact that President Trump did not come to Congress before this happened, but has notified us certainly afterwards, and I anticipate we will continue to work with them. You know, you can go back to 1989 when President Bush used military forces to go into Panama and extract Manuel Noriega, for very similar circumstances, very similar drug trafficking charges, brought him to America to face charges, and in fact ended up in an American prison for almost 2 decades. I think the same result's going to be here. We certainly did not assassinate Maduro. We're bringing him to justice through the rule of law, through a process that's going to be dictated by the American system, and that's appropriate.
And you mentioned, of course, going back to D.C. and sort of figuring out the next steps. Of course, it's very early on. Everything is sort of still, there's a lot of moving parts with this. But talk about what are the next steps. What do you intend to see happen next?
Yeah, next steps for me as a member of Congress that I expect and anticipate is a full briefing from the administration about the intentions moving forward. We already had a classified briefing before we left for the Christmas holiday about this situation. I anticipate further classified briefings with Secretary of State Rubio and Secretary of War Hegseth and other members of the cabinet to make sure that we are involved in the decision-making process and that we're following the Constitution, the role of each of the legislative body and the executive body under the Constitution, and that we are working together for the best interests of the United States.